Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Scope here on British Muslim TV. I'm Waqar Rizvi, your host, and this week we're going to be discussing, while we're going live, of course, on satellite as well as across BMTV's various social media platforms, Pakistani politics and what an eventful week it has been in Pakistan. Few weeks, in fact, I should say. The populist Prime Minister Imran Khan has been ousted through a vote of no confidence that was held in the National Assembly, a move which him, his supporters, his party believe was carried out at the behest of the United States. Now, why would the United States want Khan out of power? And why didn't Khan publish the evidence that he says he has in his hands to prove that allegation that he has put forth? Now, to those who oppose him, this was seen as a move to muddy a constitutionally sound method of removing a sitting prime minister in the country. Now, in the wake of his removal from office, protests and counter-protests, both inside and outside the country, have taken place and have brought to light the growing political divisions in the country at this time. With a new prime minister in office, Shehbaz Sharif, who is, as we know, a brother of a former prime minister, no less, both of whom face serious cases of corruption. How much will foreign policy change, if at all? Shehbaz Sharif is said to have made it clear that Pakistanis, quote unquote, as beggars cannot be choosers when it comes to the relationship with the United States. Does that mean a foreign policy in which other countries' influence will grow further? I'm going to put those questions now to our esteemed panelists who are joining us today. We're joined by Dr. Syed Mohammed Ali, who is a development anthropologist with 2 decades of experience working on major international development challenges, including governance problems. He's a visiting professor at the George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs and is a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute. He also writes a weekly op-ed in the Express Tribune, an affiliate of the New York Times here in Pakistan. We're also joined by Dr. Mariam Mufti, who is an author and assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Waterloo. She's a comparative political scientist who works on regime change and political participation in hybrid regimes and teaches courses on domestic and international politics of South Asia with a special emphasis on Pakistan. She's also worked with the Asia Foundation, the Center for Strategic International Studies, and the Department for International Development. Mariam and Muhammad Ali, thank you both for joining us today here on British Muslim TV. Muhammad Ali, if I may, I'd like to start with you and just ask a very blunt question. Do you think the US ousted Imran Khan?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I wouldn't, deny on the one hand that there is a history of regime change, vis-a-vis the US, but the manner in which this conversation, the context in which this conversation took place, I think that in diplomatic circles, there's a norm for having informal, candid conversations. And from what we know of the incident so far, it was just a candid conversation which was reported back, as it should be, right, through the Foreign Office. And perhaps, when it came to the Prime Minister, it was blown out of context, and sort of an official communique between, the ambassador and the country and the ruling government was heavily politicized. Right, and this is not the manner in which the US does regime change, where it'll approach the ambassador of a country and tell them that they are unhappy with a sitting prime minister. So I'd say categorically, in this case, it was not, it was not a serious attempt at regime change.
Mariam, you know the arguments on the other side, right? So they would point to the fact that Imran Khan was in Moscow when Russia launched the invasion on Ukraine. That they would point to the relations with China, with bettering relations even with Iran possibly, and that all of the above would have angered the Americans. What do you make of that?
I mean, certainly the United States has given Pakistan a bit of a cold shoulder. I mean, President Joe Biden, after being elected, has not called then Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan. And since the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan, certainly the United States has not turned to Pakistan for, mediating the relationship between the United States and the Taliban. In fact, it turns to Qatar. So one could definitely see evidence of the relationship between the United States and Pakistan being at an all-time low, but certainly the United States' priorities and its attention is being directed towards the Indo-Pacific and given recent events in Ukraine, towards Europe.
Mohammed Ali, what do you make then of, as I said, the above, right? So relations with China would certainly make the Americans nervous, wouldn't it? Because that just goes to show China's growing influence. Would that be enough of a reason to, at the very least, implicitly get involved or, indirectly get involved and say maybe Khan isn't the best person?
Well, but that, you see, doesn't really have anything to do with Khan, because I mean that you see on if you look at the Pakistan-China relationship, right? I mean it's had, I mean, while ironic that the Islamic Republic of Pakistan becomes best friends with the communist government in China, but for China, there's been strategic value there as well, because it's been able to contain sort of Indian, belligerence, if you will. I mean, especially after their skirmish in the 1960s, and the relationship between Pakistan and China, I would also, I would argue, is not something that has been thrust upon Pakistan, right? Because this whole idea of initially Gwadar being being sort of wooing Chinese investment into Gwadar was done at Pakistan's initiative, right? President Musharraf, a military ruler, had had approached China, and subsequently the PPP government, the PML government, and Imran Khan have all sort of played ball with China, despite sort of US, concerns that this is another case of predatory lending, because I mean that there is this great game unfolding across South Asia, right? And Pakistan has tried to maintain a balance between its bilateral relationships with the US and with China, which the Imran Khan government has come and really upset that attempt to strike a balance. I mean, it was ironically, Imran Khan had said that he would come in and look at sort of, the issue of transparency within CPEC, but it's something that went, went off his radar when he was elected. And I do not think that is a relationship that's going to be influenced by, Shehbaz Sharif coming to power now.
If I may just continue to play devil's advocate for a moment more, Mariam. Another thing that his supporters argue is that, listen, the fact that he criticized the United States so much while he was still in office, and we can talk about specifics when it comes to drone strikes, right? So he would rail on about the fact that, and this is not untrue, certainly, that a lot of innocent Pakistanis did die because of drone strikes. And then he spoke about the fact that, there wasn't accountability in that regard on the behalf of the United States. Would any of the above give you pause to say the US would be angry enough, again, to want him out because of that?
No, I don't agree with that, because look, while both of us are pointing to the fact that the United States is displeased with Pakistan right now, I do not think it was enough to bring about so-called regime change, and especially through undiplomatic comments made by senior level US State Department officials in a communication with outgoing Pakistani ambassador to the United States. That is certainly not what is happening over here. Now, incoming Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has said that he is willing to authenticate this so-called foreign conspiracy that the PTI supporters are talking about, and he says that he will hold an in-camera session in the National Security Council to ascertain this. But certainly, the United States of America is not responsible for the ouster of outgoing Prime Minister Imran Khan. I would like to add on comments that have already been made that sure. Imran Khan was interested in pursuing an independent foreign policy, and he would consistently make comments to this effect. And when in the UN General Assembly, when the Pakistani government was asked to take a stand against Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and Pakistan was choosing to not take a stand and to remain neutral, yes, this could have angered the United States and certainly displeased the military, which initially had supported the Imran Khan regime, but of late has been displeased with the way Imran Khan has been conducting foreign policy, and especially towards Russia. Chief of Army Staff, General Bajwa, came out point blank and said that he condemns the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, this could have angered the United States, but not to the point of bringing about regime change.
You know, Muhammad Ali, whether we like it or not, the cast has been die, as they say, and whether it's even true or not, this allegation is out there and many people believe it. Does that have an impact upon now Shehbaz Sharif and the way he's going to form foreign policies, especially towards the US?
Yeah, I mean, it has, you know, this politicization is going to have implications. I mean, it's, you know, there was no love lost between the US and Pakistan. I mean, their public sentiment against the US has been running high for the past 20 years. The Pakistani establishment also has been, you know, it's been dealing with the US in, you know, whether it comes to drone strikes or other forms of support with a certain narrative, but engaging the Pakistani public with a slightly different narrative, you know, which has led to this, you know, growing animosity towards the US. And certainly this politicization, I think within the Foreign Office also, there's a lot of disgruntlement because diplomats do not want, you know, their statements to be politicized like this. I mean, I would not envy any sort of ambassador, and there is a new ambassador now, you know, to the US. You know, this is going to be sort of a very tricky situation to manage. I think for Imran Khan, though, I mean, you know, he is in line with sort of other populist sentiments that are being very successfully harnessed, you know, in South Asia, be it the Rajapaksa regime, you know, when it came out as a strongman regime, you know, and its security agenda after the Easter bombings, right? And now, I mean, of course, Sri Lanka is in economic meltdown like Pakistan had been. But then the Modi government, right? So, I mean, how it used ethno-nationalism. I mean, if you look at sort of Imran Khan's posturing right now, it's religio-nationalist and anti-imperialist, right? And, you know, and I think he's doing himself a disfavor. I mean, one is all for independent foreign policy, right? I mean, if you look at Bangladesh, if you look at India, if you look at, you know, Pakistan is not the only country that has refused to call out Russia. But the manner in which, you know, Imran Khan did it, the optics, you know, laying a wreath on the tomb of the unknown soldier while the Russians are moving into Ukraine. I mean, that was just not well thought out and not, you know, well planned.
But, you know, Mariam, the argument can be made that Shehbaz Sharif's statement about, you know, beggars can't be choosers was not also well thought out. You know, I mean, that did turn off a lot of people. Do you think that that was a wrong statement to make, knowing that, you know, he was going to be coming into office?
I think Shehbaz Sharif was doing a couple of things. I think one, he's sending a signal to the Pakistani military that he's not necessarily going to pursue a foreign policy that is on purpose going to try and anger the United States. The second is that Shehbaz Sharif has to keep a coalition together. And part of that coalition is the Pakistan People's Party, which traditionally has actually garnered a lot of support from the United States. So I think there's that element as well. And then the third is that I think Shehbaz Sharif definitely believes that Pakistan cannot afford to anger its Western allies. Shehbaz Sharif is certainly going to cozy up to the Chinese government, as other prime ministers and presidents of Pakistan have done so, but more so perhaps because he is somebody with a reputation for infrastructure development, and he is perhaps going to use, you know, boost the China-Pakistan economic corridor.
Mariam, if I may stay with you for just a little bit more, on the question of countries like Iran as well, do you think that Shehbaz Sharif will be able to find a balance in relations with Iran also? We just have about 30 seconds.
I think with respect to Iran, and certainly in the televised address by Shehbaz Sharif to the parliament upon being elected, he did mention that he would like to strengthen relations with Iran and with Saudi Arabia. Now, I'm not sure how easy it is going to be to establish that balance. As you can well imagine, that relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia are not particularly positive. And if the Pakistani government is going to continue to want to receive aid from Saudi Arabia, then trying to also establish a relationship with Iran is going to be somewhat difficult. Certainly, if you look at the geopolitical dynamics in South Asia and the region broadly, India also is pursuing a foreign policy towards Iran right now. And so I think taking all of that into consideration, I don't think it's going to be particularly easy.
Okay, we're going to go into a very short break, or not actually a short break. We're going to go into a break for the call to prayer, in fact, and I'm going to ask both Syed Mohammed Ali as well as Mariam Mufti to stand by with us, as we're going to, after the break, conclude the segment as well about what's been happening in Pakistan and its foreign relations. But before going to that, I do want to say that after the break, we're going to continue to discuss the challenge now for Shehbaz Sharif, because it's one thing to say what Imran Khan did vis-a-vis foreign policy, but it's very, very important to also then hone in on how exactly Shehbaz Sharif is going to be able to then balance the various foreign policy challenges for this country. And on top of that, of course, we can talk about the Saudis as well. I'll be back after the call to prayer, continuing this discussion with Mariam and Mohammed Ali. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everyone, to The Scope here on BMTV. We're continuing to discuss developments in Pakistani politics, and we're still joined by Mohammed Ali and Mariam. And Mohammed, I wanted to start off with you for your concluding remarks. And I wanted to ask you about, before going to break, Mariam had mentioned, Saudi Arabia as well. And I wanted to hone in on Saudis for a moment, because, they too seem to be shifting their allegiances a tad bit, aren't they, towards the like of the Russians and the Chinese, as in having better relations with them over the United States. There's always talk about the US leaving this region or diminishing its role in the region. Does Pakistan or Sharif then even need to then worry about relations with the US as much as they may previously have had to?
I think that there will still be a need. I mean, all countries, try to hedge their bets with hegemons, if you will. Right. So MBS has had, issues. I think they liked the Trump administration better, right? But since the arrival of the Biden administration, issues of human rights, the Khashoggi incident, etc., those are sore points. Of course, the Chinese investments in the Middle East are growing. I mean, Saudi and the UAE also have very good relations with India. So there's, in this multilateral world, there's a lot of issues in the mix. So yes, Pakistan, the Sharifs have had very good relations with Saudi Arabia. I don't know how much they will try to, do rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but they will certainly like to, Shehbaz Sharif being, someone who is seen to be expedient, right? And he's going to try and, I think, expedite sort of bureaucratic hurdles to try and activate the special economic zones in CPEC. I think because the biggest problem right now is the economic woes, right? I mean, we have a lot of populist rhetoric around, around these issues and the role of foreign actors. But ultimately, it's about the inflation. It's about the sort of now almost unsustainable debt burden, right? And, these are challenges that are going to even remain for the Sharif government. I mean, let's remember that, he's still, the cases pending against him for corruption. I mean, there's been top-down, elite-captured economic growth in Pakistan. There's a legacy of that. I mean, colonial, post-colonial. So those issues remain, but still, the stock exchange has kind of, there's more confidence. The depreciation of the dollar has kind of halted and slightly reversed. It would be interesting if Bilawal Bhutto, is made, the foreign minister. I mean, there's some conversation around that. But I mean,
Mohammed Ali,
still,
I'm gonna cut you off just because because we have the last 3 minutes. I do apologize. I wanted to give Mariam the last 3 minutes. Mariam, on that point of the economy, it is actually very important. I'm glad Mohammed Ali brought it up because we always hear about the Saudis giving a gift of $1 billion here and there, and then the Chinese, there's this vicious cycle seemingly in the country of money coming in to pay off certain debts and then some other benefactor coming in giving that money. Can we find a balance to actually do something that's in the country's national interest instead of staying within this vicious cycle of always being indebted to somebody?
Unfortunately, that's one of the major challenges, I think, confronting the incoming Sharif government. I mean, if you think about it, Pakistan is highly aid dependent, and that aid dependency is not about to stop. I mean, if you look at the recent reports, Pakistan is teetering on the brink of 13% inflation. And then at the same time, $35 billion of financing is required to pay back the debt burden that is accruing, that is almost 310% of Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves. I mean, it is a really, really complex economic outlook for the incoming regime. And I don't think that it's going to be easy for Pakistan to necessarily stop being aid dependent on countries like Saudi Arabia, on China and the United States and so on. But I would like to say one other thing about the challenges facing the Shehbaz Sharif government, which is that he is a consensus prime minister of all political parties in Pakistan, save one, and that is the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. This is a very, very strange coalition of political parties that have previously had differing political ideologies, differing political and economic agendas. And the fact that Shehbaz Sharif is going to have to keep this coalition together is going to be very, very interesting to watch. Muhammad Ali also pointed out Bilawal Bhutto and whether he's going to be appointed as a foreign minister. Cabinet formation is going to be a major challenge for the Sharif government. And the last thing I would say, Shehbaz Sharif is going to be criticized for the moves that he makes. Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf is most effective when it is in opposition, and they are going to criticize the PMLN, and this might impact PMLN's electoral fortunes as we head towards another election come October.
Very well. Thank you so much, Mariam Mufti and Syed Mohammed Ali. We really, really appreciate both of you taking your time out to join us today. We're going to leave it there at that, viewers, but thank you very much for joining us for the Scope of this week here on BMTV. I'm Waqar Rizvi, signing off. Thank you very much for watching.